What up? How's it going? I'm going to talk to you right now about my manual for my husband. So, about a year and a half ago, I listened to a podcast called The Manual by Brooke Castillo, and it totally blew my mind. She said things like, I love my husband for simply existing, just like people would love a puppy. And I remember thinking, yeah, like, has she really been married before? Or has she been in a marriage with kids? Because that's just like not how it is. Like, it's just what I don't know what world this lady's living in, but I don't think that's right. But she said enough things in the podcast that I was a little bit intrigued. And I was like, oh, okay, I want to hear more. Like, I want to hear more about this Brooke Castillo lady and what she has to say. So, what is a manual? She talks about a manual. A manual is an instruction book we've written for someone else in our lives. And then we tie our emotion to whether this person follows through or not. So this is so interesting because we have these rules for people and we're justified in having them. We usually haven't told them about our rules that we have for them. And then when they don't follow through, we get upset. There's something like, there's some disconnect there, right? Like, oh, if they just followed through on these things, like we'd be happy, right? But then we're like placing our happiness on someone else's behavior. And why, like, that's to me, I just realized like that's kind of like it's very disempowering, right? So the liberating thing is like understanding that our thoughts create our emotions, because then when we realize that and we know that our thoughts are optional, we can choose to think different thoughts that don't elicit, maybe negative emotion based on someone else's action. Because I don't really want to hand my power over to someone I don't have any control over, right? Um, and one interesting thing for me is it is really easy for me to like drop my manual for other humans, but I felt justified for a really long time to hang on to a manual with regard to my marriage. Like, yeah, I can love other people for just existing as humans, like Brooke says, but it's kind of different in a marriage. Like in a marriage, there's expectations and commitment and partnership, and we're like this team. And, like that's just how it works. We work towards this goal, and this is how it is. And so I kind of just like held on to these expectations of my husband, and I felt okay. And then last spring, I kind of was like feeling a little bit uncomfortable with the expectations. So I was like, well, maybe it's more like holding him accountable to something, right? He needs to be held accountable to something. So maybe I can like drop expectations, but still hold him accountable. But I was doing the same thing. Um, yeah. And I just, like I wanted to hold him accountable to the promises that he made like forever ago, right? And, I felt justified. My friends felt more than justified telling me like that I should hold them to even more expectations. And, like my interpretation of like the proclamation to the family, and like that helped me feel justified in feeling this. And stuff he had promised me helped me kind of just like maintain uh, that justification of holding on to expectations that I had. So, I have this like circumstance, husband not working, and circumstances are neutral, right? For me, I was making it mean like worst case scenario. For someone else, I might be like, sweet, like I want to be out working all the time. This is the best thing ever. And that's why it's neutral, because we're not all going to have the same reaction to a circumstance. So husband not working was the circumstance, and my thought was that I was hanging on to was like his role is to be a provider, mine is to be home with the kids, and our thoughts lead to our feelings. And so when I thought that thought, I felt exasperated and pretty powerless. And when I felt powerless, I kind of withdrew from my husband and isolated myself from him. And the result of that was not showing up 100% for myself or really my kids, because I was expending unnecessary energy on someone else's actions I had zero control over. So I just want to share that with you because I feel very strongly that like our thoughts lead to our feelings, which drive our actions and produce our results in life. And that is exactly what was happening to me. Now you might think, okay, but yeah, his role is to provide, and he promised you he was going to provide. Like he needs to follow through. And what I would say is like that's a thought, and thoughts are optional. And even with the proclamation of the family, like I remember talking to Jody Moore, and she said, "Well, when I read that, I think about me and how it applies to me." And I just remember thinking, like, wow, okay, like that's very clean and simple. And I was curious enough to kind of continue to entertain and try on those thoughts. Um, so that's something that helps me a lot. And then, but someone else might say, but yeah, but like, what about the promises like made in the temple? And, like my husband did make promises in the temple. And from what I remember, most of them were to God. And that's between him and God. And also, I think God put us on this earth knowing very well that we would break promises and covenants that we made. And I think that's part of our existence and our experience. And he knew that was going to happen, and he still put us on this earth. And so my role in this life is to not worry about other people and their covenants that they're making and breaking. Like my role is to worry about me and what I can control. Um, but then someone might say, well, what? Like you're just fine, like being in a marriage where someone walks all over with you, walks all over you, and you have zero expectations, and just do nothing about it. Like that's what kind of marriage you want. And what I would say to that is that's also a thought, and that thought is optional. And this is not the case at all. Like healthy boundaries can be set in any relationship, and I'll address boundaries more in another post. So it was interesting because, after talking to Jody Moore and Brooke Castillo, I realized that like if I can like love other humans so readily for just existing, like why would I hold my spouse who's another human to this like different standard than all the other humans, right? Like why? He's a human, you're a human, everyone else are humans. Like, why should he be held to some different standard? And another thing I realized too was like, when I think about love, I want to be on the receiving end of, what kind of love would that be? Would it be someone being like, well, as long as she follows through with her matriarchal duties and this and this and this and this, like, then this is what a marriage is? Is that what I want? Or would I want someone to love me for simply existing? And when I think about like the love that my husband has for me, it has been for existing as a human. And I decided to do the same. I love him. He loves me. This is the love that I want. And this is the love that I am choosing to have. Clean, simple, and the most incandescent love I've ever experienced with another human.